Hello and welcome back. So, you're planning a trip to Vietnam and want to take your drone with you. And you've gone onto the internet and done all the research about rules and regulations for using the drone in Vietnam. And you're feeling absolutely confused. Well, you're not alone. Vietnam drone rules and regulations are confusing. So, in this video, I'll try to break it down in a simple possible terms as to what you need to do and need to be aware of when bringing the drone and using the drone in Vietnam. And a quick note before we start, this video is not a legal advice and you always have to check the latest rules and regulations with relevant authorities because they do change often. So with that out of the way, let's tackle the big question first. Can you bring the drone into Vietnam? And the answer is simple, yes you can. Legally, you are allowed to bring your drone into Vietnam as a tourist. However, in saying that, there has been a number of reports that customs tried and confiscated some drones from tourists. And I'm not going to speculate the reasons for it. There could be a multitude of reasons why this has happened. But you need to be aware of that legally, you are within your rights to bring your drone with you to Vietnam. And if the worst thing happens and the customs do decide to hold it, they need to provide you a document and then you'll be able to pick up your drone on the way out of the country. I know it's not ideal, but unfortunately it does happen. Now, onto the question, if your drone needs to be registered, the answer is also yes. You do need to register your drone in Vietnam to be able to fly it legally. And I will get into the details of registration a bit later in the video. Before we do, let's go through the standard rules of operation of a drone in Vietnam. So, in Vietnam, you can only fly your drone during daylight hours. The maximum altitude you can fly your drone at is 150 meters. Your drone weight must be below 12 kgs, and you're not allowed to fly over government buildings, military installations, and obviously within proximity of airport. You're not allowed to use your drone to drop things or carry stuff, so just make sure you don't add anything to your drone. And lastly, respect the privacy of others when flying your drone. Unfortunately, there is no no-fly zone map available for Vietnam, which makes it a bit difficult. But here's a few tricks you should consider before flying your drone and obviously to ensure the safety of your drone. So in Hanoi, there's been reports of a lot of radio signal jammers within the city and around government buildings. So personally, I would just try to avoid flying around Hanoi at all. Now, airports, I'd say rely, especially if you have a DJI, rely on your controller. If you are within the airport zone or within the no-fly zone around the airport, the controller, if you haven't modified it, will not allow you to take off. And for military installations, what I do is I usually go through the Google Maps and basically just check the area where I'm planning to fly in. Just make sure there is nothing suspicious in there. You don't want to fly over military installations in Vietnam. You'll get in a lot of trouble and you just do not want to mess with military or any law enforcement in Vietnam. Now, let's talk about the registration process, which, to be honest, is a pain in the butt. But it is what it is. So, the entity responsible for drone regulations and the registration of drones is Vietnam Civil Aviation Authority. And to register your drone, you need to fill in the application form and send it through to them either via email or to their physical address. The cost of the registration also varies. It's between 300 and about 700 US dollars. And the registration is per flight. It's not per your trip, it's not per drone, it's per flight. So if you're taking a flight, let's say tomorrow, that's one registration. If you're taking a flight in a different location the day after tomorrow, it's another registration, which is quite expensive if you think about it. If you have to do a per flight registration, and let's say on a minimum, it's going to cost you $300 per registration, and you're going to do 10 flights over the course of your trip in Vietnam, it's going to add up to $3,000, which is ridiculously expensive. Now, furthermore, the registration process takes about 2 weeks, and you're not guaranteed to get an answer. And from what I've understood with talking with locals and going through the process, which I'll talk in details a bit later, it seems like if you're submitting your form in English, it most probably will not be answered or reviewed. And if you're submitting your form in Vietnamese, then you have a much higher chances of getting it approved and getting your license for flying. The form itself is available online, and I will drop a link in the description. And it's also available in both in Vietnamese and English. And of course, if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know Vietnamese, how I'm going to fill in the form, there are local services in Vietnam available to help you out with the registration process. They called themselves fixers, and they do charge a commission on it. So in my case, we did do one registration while in Vietnam. We registered just to fly around just outside the Hanoi. It was our last few days, and the registration cost us $500. We did submit the registration at the beginning of our trip, and we did get the license approved. We used the fixer on the ground to do the registration for us. But unfortunately, and that's another kind of a drawback of this whole process, is when we requested for the flight and we got it approved, on that day it was raining, so we couldn't actually fly. So it was a waste of $500 to get the license and not being able to fly. And obviously the fee is not refundable. So by now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I'm just a tourist. I'm not going to pay $300 or more per flight of my drone just to take a few pictures or a few videos for my personal use. And it's totally understandable. The process and the price is not realistic. So here are a few suggestions, and let's put it that way, maybe workarounds as to what you can actually do. So you don't break the law, you don't get into trouble, and still manage to get few good shots in Vietnam. So number one is avoid flying in the major cities. I mean, it's just simply not worth if you don't have the license. You are risking getting into trouble with police, getting in trouble with other authorities, and although there are a lot of videos saying, well, it's not really enforced, and that could be true. Yeah, it might not be enforced that much, but do you want to be one of those persons who actually do get caught and do get into trouble and have to face the consequences? Just ask yourself, are you prepared to take that risk? So avoid flying in major hubs, major tourist attractions, especially where there are a lot of people and someone may complain. What you can do is fly just outside the big centers. Fly in a rural Vietnam. It's absolutely beautiful and absolutely amazing. What we tend to do is we normally would find a small restaurant somewhere. We would walk in and we would ask permission to fly the drone from their property. We would sit down, we would have lunch or dinner there depending on the time, or breakfast. But we do get the permission from the property owner to launch our drones from there. And this way, it kind of gives you, I would say, a loophole. So you kind of go into the gray area of the law where you do have the permission to fly. You're flying within, especially if the restaurant has rice fields attached to it or anything like that, right? You're flying within the restaurant or the property confines or just outside it, right? Don't go too far out. So you do have the permission to fly on that property, right? And in that respect, police or anyone can't really do much to you because you got the permission to do so. And the other thing I can say is you can fly in unpopulated areas. It's still beautiful, it's still amazing. You're gonna get great shots and you're not gonna risk getting into trouble. And the last point is, when we traveled through Vietnam, we had a guide with us. So for the whole trip, we had a guide with us who was taking us all around Vietnam. And It's great to have a local with you because they can talk to obviously other locals, they can explain the area to you, and they can find out if you can fly a drone there or not, or they can help you get the permission from the locals living there to fly your drone. So if you're traveling through Vietnam, my recommendation also just get a local guide, explain to him that you have a drone and you want to fly it, and he will help you find the places where you can fly the drone without risking being caught, or worse, getting into some kind of trouble. And that's about it. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you do travel to Vietnam with your drone, good luck and stay safe.